If you want to hear the history of Russian car market in one sentence, then here it is. It was born in 1991, went through multiple ups and downs, saw large expansion of Western and Chinese car makers, and in 2025 most manufacturers have left, the dealers have closed, the sales have dropped near zero, and in 2025 the Russian car market is dying. But if you think it's hit the rock bottom, that you are wrong. Think again. It's going to get even worse. Much worse. Howdy, howdy, everyone. My name is Konstantin. Welcome to Inside Russia, where usual Russia is explained by the unusual Russian. Before I tell you the message, the current state of Russian car market, I would like to check something that I did this live stream right, because this is the second one I started. The first one was about half an hour ago, and I simply did not public the link to this live stream. I didn't make an announcement. Anyway, welcome to Inside Russia. As usual, here you will find truth, common sense, and logic, and emotions, because I'm still a human being after all. You will not find BS, propaganda, or lies. And I'm still recovering from pneumonia, so my voice could be off a little bit. Please forgive me for that. And I'm still too weak. My voice is too weak to do a very long live streams, so there will be no live stream chat today. There might be one tomorrow. Before I tell you the current state of Russian car market, I would like to tell you its history, a story of how it was born and how it developed. And that's a fascinating story. I'll try to make it brief as usual. There was no car market in the USSR. Heck, in the USSR there weren't any markets. But in the 1991, the USSR fell apart. And car market in New Russia was born. For the first 10 years, it was gray market, meaning cars were brought from Europe by individuals, regular people, one car at a time. It was a long and dangerous process, and it looked something like this. You would come up with a large sum of cash, travel by bus to Europe, Poland, or Germany, bought an old Audi or Volkswagen, and drove it back through Belarus and Western Russia to your home where you lived. The biggest problems were with the local police and the mafia on the highways. The police pulled you over anytime they saw you and extorted money. And the mafia, it was much worse. They would stop you, force you to stop. They could take all you had, or they could just take payment because you were going through their highway. Or they could take your car and even kill you, beat you up, anything went. Then after you'd make it home, probably would sleep a lot and drink a lot of vodka, then you'd go to a local customs office in DMV and you would register the vehicle and pay customs tax. And it was a lot of money back then. And right after, you usually would sell the car for profit. And people did that professionally. They would import cars by demand, meaning someone would save up money for a car and he would show up and ask for a specific car. For example, a 3-year-old Volkswagen, 5-year-old Audi, depending on the budget. And the person who was buying cars and bringing them to Russia professionally would call his partner, let's say in Germany, and order an Audi or Volkswagen or Mercedes or BMW. That person would go and find the required car, and then someone would just grab the money, travel to the destination, pay the money, and would drive the car back. And that's how it worked. I remember quite well because a lot of people did that. Even my fellow students at the university, two students did that. They went to Germany. I think once was Poland, once was Germany. Back in '95 and '96, and both times they came back, returned successfully in one piece, and they actually did well. They sold the cars every time. But after they came back for the second time, they said enough, no more, too dangerous. They were telling stories of how they were trying to shake off, cars chasing them, mafia cars, and it was so crazy. Anyway, back then they weren't any foreign manufacturers present in Russia. No official sales, services, or spare parts, no warranty. But starting the year 2000 or so, Western manufacturers started entering Russia. One by one, slowly at first, and then faster and faster. They established official offices in Russia, contracting car selling companies to make them nominate them as dealers, started selling cars directly to Russian customers through dealers. They provided spare parts, they provided qualified technicians who knew what they were doing, and they provided the official services and the warranty. Russian consumers started benefiting. You buy new, you get official warranty, you get official services, That was something unheard before. And I have to mention the Chinese companies. The Chinese manufacturers started entering Russian market at about the same time, early 2000s. But they weren't too many Chinese manufacturers at the time, and they weren't good. The Chinese cars could not compete with the Western cars. They were ugly, unreliable, uncomfortable, and outdated. They were literally crap. Even though they were dirt cheap, and I mean dirt cheap, so much cheaper than the Western cars. The Russians didn't want to buy them. For the following 20 or so years, the Western makers well established themselves in Russia. They built plants, warehouses, established sophisticated dealer networks, taught dealers corporate standards, taught how to deal with customers. They made banks their partners. If you were to buy a car in Russia before the start of the war in 2022, you would find the process incredibly similar to buying a car, say, in Munich, Milano, or, for example, Austin, Texas. Same thing, same brands too. And the Chinese also grew in quality, and they were still dirt cheap in Russia. And they were still not competing. They couldn't compete with the Western brands, but they were becoming much better than 20 years ago, prior when they just entered Russian market. So by 2022, Russian car market became civilized, and I would say it had a degree of maturity. There were industry leaders, standards, and regulations. And I should mention the Chinese here. They advanced a lot too. Then in February 2022 came the war. Russia invaded Ukraine. And instantly, Russian market started changing. Russia got slapped with economic sanctions. Economic and prohibitive sanctions. That has changed a lot. That's changed everything. You know what? Before I tell you how Russian market changed, I would like to take this opportunity to take a sip of this wonderful English breakfast tea. Ah, and thank you. You watching the video right now, you a part of Inside Russia community, you for writing me letters of encouragement, commenting the videos, um, liking them, praying along with me and for me, and sending me love. Thank you. This community is a lifesaver. Thank you for buying coffees at buymecoffee.com, for supporting through Patreon and PayPal. I promise you that no matter whether I'm monetized or not, and it's going on the 8th month of being demonetized by Google for my political stand for the truth and against Ukraine, Ukraine's war, Ukraine's aggression that Russia is um, doing in Ukraine, standing against Russian government. Um, that's what appears that Google has demonetized me for that. Um, Despite being demonetized, I still promise that every day when I feel physically um, good for that, I go in front of the camera and I tell you the truth about the transformation that Russia is undergoing. So thank you so very much. Now, all Western companies left Russia very soon after Russia invaded Ukraine. That was the first half of 2022. For each company, the departure was very painful. Most major brands had built manufacturing plants and large infrastructure in Russia, warehouses, um, educational centers, plants. I'll just give you a few companies. Renault Nissan. In early 2000s, they bailed out a Russian company called Moskvich. Moskvich was falling apart. It literally stopped producing cars because Moskvich was, well, it was like a satire of a car. It wasn't even a car. I know, I used to drive one in early 90s that my parents had Moskvich. So the plant was falling apart, the company was falling apart, and then the Renault stepped in and bought Moskvich and started rebuilding the plant. And then Nissan joined, and there was a joint company, joint venture, Nissan Renault. They built a magnificent plant in Moscow. Very high tech, producing high quality cars. And right after the start of the war, they were forced to sell the plant to Moscow government for €1. They had invested over 3.5 billion euros over the years before the start of the war, and they sold everything for €1, and they just departed Russia. BMW sold the plant they had built called Autoror in Kaliningrad. Mercedes, Volkswagen, Toyota, you name it. These big major companies, car manufacturers, all left Russia. Um, they left and they stopped selling cars to Russia. That was the punishment for what Russia was doing to Ukraine. Don't make a mistake. A lot of people do that mistake. Those foreign cars, foreign brands, they were still on sale in Russia. But from being official sales, they became gray import. Um, the process to get them to Russia, to Moscow, to St. Petersburg, on into a store, used to be called dealerships. Now they just became car stores because obviously these major brands pulled the rights from the dealerships. So the process would look something like that. You know, a businessman would fly, let's say, to Dubai, would buy a couple or a few cars, and would instantly import them to, let's say, Uzbekistan. Then from Uzbekistan, the cars would travel to Kazakhstan, and from Kazakhstan to Moscow, Russia. Well, just just so you understand that very simple process, very transparent process of car importing has turned into very sophisticated, half legal, half illegal process of gray importing. Okay, um, this gray importing scheme increases the price of a car by a great deal. At this point, we are seeing brand new cars costing up to 4 times more than they cost before the war. If you look at the premium cars such as BMWs, Mercedeses, you go way over $150,000 for a car, you know? That's absolutely insane. On top of that, it takes much longer to import a car to Russia through all these countries, surrounding countries, than directly from a manufacturing plant, let's say from Munich. Okay? These new cars, there are troubles with them. Although they're still quality cars, they're still Western cars, they don't have official warranty back into the 90s. They don't have spare parts, official spare parts. You have to import them again through Uzbekistan, China, Kyrgyzstan, you know, this country. They have no qualified technicians. There's no tech support anymore. And all online services that, work in the cars, they don't work anymore in Russia. So it became very expensive to buy, let's say, new BMW in Russia. It's possible. Not too many people can afford them, but they're still on display. They're still being sold. They used to be sold by thousands. Now they're sold by dozens. And this situation started happening in 2022, and this was when the Chinese manufacturers flooded Russia. See, the Chinese car market was born in the 90s. And when the Chinese companies started coming in, entering Russia, there was simply not too many of them. But then over 20 years, they grew in numbers. Chinese are good at manufacturing. So they started manufacturing cars, but it takes a certain kind of manufacturing to make good cars. And the Chinese are still working on that. And I'm sure in the future, in quite a few years from now, they might be making decent cars. Well, they're making decent electronics, computers, clothing, and they will be making decent cars in the future. Okay, and it takes a long time. Europeans have been making cars for over 100 years. So anyway, the Chinese companies, just too many of them, flooded Russia. Dozens of manufacturers with difficult names and hundreds of different models they brought with them. All cars non-Russified, very difficult to drive because everything was in Chinese, is still in Chinese, all the signs, But anyway, the Chinese used this situation when the Western companies, the car manufacturers left, and they jacked up prices. For example, in China, a certain model of a company of car called Li Xiang cost transferred into Russian rubles 900,000 rubles. That's about $9,000. But that's in China. But they bring it to Russia and they sell it for 3.5 million. That's 4 times more. Okay, why? Because they can. There is no competition. The only competition in Russia right now is the gray market, which is not even a competition. It's way more expensive than the Chinese cars cost. But the Russian car manufacturers, all two of them, obviously Russian car manufacturers have stayed in the market, and there was euphoria at first. Euphoria. Oh, you know what? Competition is gone. Now Russians will be buying Russian-made cars, and there's going to be quite an impulse to development of Russian car manufacturing. The plants will be, the new models will be coming in, and so forth. But anyway, euphoria died very, very fast. People did not buy Russian cars. Well, first of all, they couldn't produce enough Russian cars because, as it turned out, literally months after Russia invaded Ukraine and the sanctions were slapped, it turned out that Russian cars were just Russian on paper. Because in reality, over 40% of components and parts in Russian cars were made outside Russia, in the West. And then the quality of Russian cars, it can't compare to the quality of the Western cars. And basically, Russian car manufacturers, the cars never took off. The sales, Russians started buying the Chinese, despite they were very expensive. But the Chinese cars, they look nice on the outside. They look modern. Okay. Huge problems with them. 3 years after, Russians are learning that the Chinese cars are disposable because there are no spare parts and there's still no knowledge database of how to fix the cars. There are no dealers, there are no qualified technicians, and there are no special tools, nothing. So basically, the Chinese sell a car in the Russian market, and the car is good only for as long as it drives. It breaks down, no one can fix it. It sounds absurd, but that's what the reality is. Well, anyway, right after the war, okay, the impact, the worst. Let's put it this way. Let's sum up the worst impact on Russian car market. Number one, sanctions have choked off access to critical components and technology made in the Western countries and in China. Number two, foreign car makers have suspended operations or have withdrawn entirely. Most have withdrawn entirely from Russia. And number three, supply chain distribution have crippled domestic production. Okay, new and used car sales in Russia over 3 years dropped in general, but the market did not collapse. Russians still buy cars, well, still bought cars. For 3 years, they were buying cars. The Chinese cars, very few Russian cars, and, the gray import Western cars. There was an increase in used car market because regular people, their income has been dropping, so therefore they cannot afford as much as they used to be able to before the war. But still, make no mistake about it, Russian people still bought cars for 3 years. And that was one major reason for that, fueling, keeping the sales alive. And I call this the war profiteering. Some Russians started earning more money after the start of the war. For example, the soldiers who signed up to go fight in Ukraine. Their families receive lots of money. They receive lots of money, alive or dead. Preferably dead because, Russian state pays more for the dead ones. Workers who are employed at the military-industrial complex. And the military-industrial complex has grown by a great deal over 3 years because obviously they need to produce more weapons, more planes, more ammo. Russia is waging the war after all. And the enterprises have been attracting people to work more for the war factories with higher salaries. And the higher salary, the more money person can afford. And of course, there have been lots of thieves who are profiteering the war by stealing taxpayers' money in the process. And there are many opportunities for that. Anyway, in my estimation, somewhere from 10 to 15 million people in Russia have been profiteering from the war. They have become richer and they can afford more than they used to before the start of the war. Again, I call these people the war profiteers. And one of the things that they were buying were cars, apartment real estate, apartments, consumer electronics, and cars. And that's what kept Russian market, one of the major reasons that kept Russian car market alive. But everything ends, and Russian car markets have also ended. 2025 came, and we are seeing the economic tsunami. This is a phenomenon when the economy is declining so fast, it's landsliding. Okay, I was forecasting this situation for 3 years, and it finally came true. Okay, it took more time than I thought it would. I thought that the economy would be in trouble in 2023, but it's really the January of 2025 when Russia started feeling the heat. Russian people started feeling great heat. Okay, so Russian markets in it's not just the car manufacturing car market, but Russian markets, many others, they just died. Russian car sales have also died. And I'm not going to tell you much about it. I'm going to show you some articles from the Russian propaganda. What Russian propaganda is talking about right now, and when it discusses the car sales. For example, this article right here. This newspaper is called МК, Московский комсомолец, and it's as propagandistic as it gets. Okay, who is to blame for catastrophic state of the Russian car market? You know, you gotta understand that to see the word catastrophic is very unusual in a Russian newspaper or on Russian TV because Russian propaganda is trying to stay away from these hard words. But you know what's going on right now in the car sales, they cannot describe by any other words. That's why they're being true right now. So, who is to blame for the catastrophic state of the Russian market? Sales of new passenger cars and light commercial vehicles in Russia fell by 45% last March. And this is a, fresh article, fairly fresh. It's from yesterday, April 16th. The president of the well, please forgive the translation. It's done automatically by Google and it's far from perfect quality, but it kind of gives you an understanding what they're talking about. Um, the president of the automobile giant and at the same time the undisputed flagship of the industry, Maxim Sokolov, suddenly realized in early April that prophecies, albeit rarely, but do come true. The result of the first quarter confirmed our last year forecast of a significant reduction in the Russian automobile market in 2025, he lamented. These are the Chinese cars that you're looking at right now. Indeed, the sales of new passenger cars and light commercial vehicles in Russia fell by 45% last March compared to the same month last year, as reported by the Association European Businesses. The car market shrank by 26% in the first quarter. Well, I think this number is sugar coated. I think the real number is more than 26%. Over the past 10 years, the only worse results in March in percentage terms were in 2022, in the height of the COVID pandemic. Uh, not the height, at the end of the COVID pandemic and at the beginning of the war. And in the first quarter in 2015, minus 36%. So in 2022, it wasn't COVID, it was the war. 59% was panic because no one really knew what was happening. March was the worst month, okay? As a representative of the European organization, he would like to see the uh, machination of geopolitics and such negative dynamics was probably caused by out of nowhere expectations of buyers for the return of some previously departed brands. But they are suspicions that the analysts are digging in the wrong direction. No kidding. Of course they are. So, the president of AvtoVAZ, Russia's largest manufacturer of cars, sees three reasons why the car market suddenly came to an end. And, friends, suddenly came to an end, it's a very harsh statement. And it usually is not used in the Russian propaganda. Okay, they try to sugarcoat, to soften it up, temporarily problems, things like that, But here they get straight to the point. Suddenly came to an end. Firstly, the high interest rate. Secondly, the tightening of requirements for borrowers and general terms of issuing loans by the central bank. Thirdly, more than a half million stocks of foreign brand cars imported in 2024, which led us to unprecedented, unjustified dumping. Well, and some other little things. Okay, my commentaries. The biggest reason for Russian car market suddenly coming to an end is the economic tsunami I've been talking about, the economic situation, the demise of Russian economy. Russian people, um, Russian people are looking at different things now, away from cars. Russian people are trying to save as much as they can. They are concerned with food prices these days. They are concerned with cars much less. And this is the trend that is just beginning. The whole article here is pretty brutal. Of course, they blame Russia's central bank, saying that, the interest rate is too high, and they forget that the Russian central bank is trying to fight inflation as much as they can. They blaming the Chinese cars that brought too many Chinese companies that they brought too many cars in 2024. In this article, they blame just about anyone except for the real reason, the real people to blame. Putin and his gang who started the war. Okay, doesn't say anything about the war. The car sales dropped because of the war. Everything is the result of the war. Economy is landsliding because of the war. The expenditures for the military industry, for the Russian armed forces, are through the roof. Okay, and Russia has lost so many revenues it enjoyed for decades before. Nothing about that. They blaming the Chinese, they blaming the central bank, things like that. So, Moskovsky Komsomolets, Russian propaganda. Wow. So the next article, Business Online, Russian car dealers. Oops. Russian car dealers. Car sales will fall even more in 2025. By the end of 2025, 1.2 million new passenger cars will be sold. The market will fall by 30%. The corresponding forecast to the development of car market was expressed by the head of the Association of Russian Automobile Dealers, Andrei Podshikoldin. It's a very interesting guy, Andrei Podshikoldin. Let me tell you some. Um, he is, I believe, one of the owners of a large company that sells cars, and he's also the head of the association. He's not really free to speak the truth, and I'll explain you why at the end of this article. Let's check it out. And by the way, this is how a gray dealer looks like. Okay, these are the cars that are either used and being resold, or they could be new but brought in a very sophisticated way. Okay, and then placed in a parking lot like this. Because it's not an official dealer of a manufacturer. It's not a BMW. It's not a Mercedes. It's not, you know, Hyundai. There are no standards. There are no requirements. Okay, these people can sell cars in any way they like, and that's actually what I remember from the '90s, how they were sold. This some fence, a parking lot inside, a few armed security guards, and that's it. You just walk in and you walk around the cars, and that's not the most pleasant experience to buy a car, let me tell you. So, why is this happening? This is a man made crisis. The lady from the central bank, meaning Elvira Nabiulina, believes that the market is growing despite everything, and the central bank rate should be raised. And no one takes into the account that 60% of passenger cars are sold on credit, and even more trucks are sold on lease. Previously, in the 90s, there was a shell game, and we were roughly the same regulation today. Apparently, her, meaning central bank's head Elvira Nabiulina, task is to reduce the Russian auto industry, and not only the auto industry, but many other industries as well. Again, that is the head of the Association of Car Dealers speaking. And then Patshikoldian notes that the automobile market is expecting a 15% drop, or 1.45 million new cars sold. In case of a pessimistic scenario, the market is expected to drop a quarter to 1.3 million cars sold. There's a different number from the previous article. Um, Igor Mazaretta, okay, the member of a public council of the Ministry of Internal Affairs of Russian Federation, said that in 2025, only 49% of respondents were making or thinking about purchasing a car, while in 2024 they were 63. So there's a big drop in numbers. Number of those who are not considering buying has also increased from 37 to 51. When choosing between a new and used car, the percentage for the new cars has increased from I'm sorry, the preference for the new ones has decreased from 49 to 43. Um, at the end of this article, it's really interesting. He tries to be optimistic. For one simple reason. This fella is an official, and he is not free to tell what he wants to, okay? Because he is responsible for the words, and the words are controlled by the Russian Federation government, by special departments, agencies, that are responsible also for propaganda. Okay, this is the idea of hope that all the officials try to infuse into Russians' heads, one way or another. Okay. Yes, the sales of new cars have dropped tremendously by 49%, but don't worry, they will rebound. Yeah, towards the end of the year. We have to wait for a few months. So don't fret, don't panic. Things are going all right. We are at the rock bottom right now. From now it's only way up. This is what him and everyone is trying to do, trying to make this impression. And that's what they do all the time, not just in this particular market, but everywhere. The biggest impression was Donald Trump. Okay, they started talking about Donald Trump in March, April of 2024, and they were giving Russians hope. Well, wait until Donald Trump comes in and becomes the president of the United States. He'll bail us out. He'll lift off sanctions. And that kept on Russians going. It gave them hope. And while you still have hope, things are, still bearable for you. Now Donald Trump is out of the window. That didn't work out the way that he was being sold to Russians. Now that they're looking for something else. Okay, this hope for markets to recover by the end of the year, hope for poverty to decrease by the end of the year, and so forth. Anyway, so I'm gonna show you the article number 3. Jumps right up. Spring has come and the car market is barely breathing. Why people don't buy cars even if they want to, and how big a car sale awaits us all. Okay, that's from a blog in the Russian media. It's also controlled by the state. It's called Taxi as Lifestyle, Taxi как стиль жизни. And this fresh article, it was released 2 days ago. And this is also a very harsh article. Before spring at least smelled of some hope. The snow melted, people came out of hibernation, and it seems like it is time to start looking for a car. To open a summer house, drive along the highway to the south, somehow renew life. But not this year. 2025 spring brought not awakening, but a final and irrevocable fiasco of the new car market in Russia. All curtain, that's the wrong translation Google did. It's finita la commedia. That's what it should say. The collapse that no one expected. Well, in fact, they did expect it. Of course, they did expect it. This collapse was expected. I talked about it so many times. Other economists talked about it. I'm not going to read you the article. I'm just gonna give you the parts, the subtitles for the main title. Imports have died down. The market has deflated. There is no hope left. That's pretty harsh, but that's pretty true. Now, this is another. You see how the numbers vary in Russian media. New car imports fell by almost 3 quarters in March. Those big propaganda media is telling you more sugar coated numbers. And there's a smaller channel with 20,000 subs, tell you how it is. Perhaps even this is sugar coated. Perhaps the situation is even worse. But 3/4 drop in March, that's pretty darn bad. Just think about it. In one German city, more is sold in a week than sold in Russia in the entire country in the entire month. So moving further, the secondary market is still alive, but it's not also in a good shape. Alive for now. There is only demand for the cheaper and the most understandable option: right hand drive Japanese cars and old European cars with left hand drive. Well, they mean not drive but wheel. Those who don't want Chinese car and who have long understood that a Lada is a pain go to the used market. Although there's a pig in the poke. At least the cat is understandable. That translation is messed up. I didn't understand what it means. Dealers are hysterical. Showrooms are clinging to remains like the Titanic to the air. Again, translation is not that great, but I think we all understood what they meant. There are simply no customers, and then the multiple resources reporting. No customers in the showrooms. The Chinese are losing points, afterwards is silent, and the state is not listening. That is true. The final act of the drama is underway, when even the banks will not be able to withstand it. And there's another problem, a very big one. Um, the cars in the showrooms were bought on credit. The dealers have debts to the banks, and the banks are not patient investors. They will tear your throat out for every penny. And that's true. And now they look at all these Vestas, Havals, and Omodas standing idle, and the banks start scratching their hands. And if the situation doesn't change, and obviously it will not, the banks will start taking the goods, simply seizing the cars to somehow compensate for the losses. And then the real fun begins, because the banks will sell quickly, cheaply into everyone. Without showroom, without balloons, without coffees, just on marketplaces, just to get back at least something, to recover some money, some. You know. The market will collapse on its own, along with prices. The end? Nope. This is just beginning of a big auto junkyard show. I actually love this article. It's very route down to the point. Just like it is. This is why I feel about this article. I absolutely agree with the author of the last article. He didn't sugarcoat much. He tells that this is just the beginning of a big show. There are more and more defaults, and that comes from commercial banks because I follow the statistics on defaults. Defaults started increasing second quarter of last year. Okay, now they're record high. More and more defaults, meaning more and more repossessions, and then everything they repossess, including cars, are going to be they'll try to sell for much cheaper, lower than the market price. And the cars is not the worst. The real estate is the worst, really, because real estate is just cost so much more, and the banks will be losing so much more. You can only lose so much on a car, but on a house or in a mansion or an apartment, you can lose much more. So all in all, it's not looking good, and there will be so many more news coming out of the car market. If you want to keep up with the news from Russian car market, please consider using Formula 54. 9 news a day that I carefully select and make available to patrons of Inside Russia. If you want to stay on top of Russia, on top of all things Russian, please consider subscribing, becoming a member of Patreon account of Inside Russia and getting access to all the news that matter. Check them out. I'm going to post a link down below after this live stream ends. So check it out, please. Russian propaganda is still trying to sugarcoat things. They're saying, okay, Russian car sales have declined a great deal. But don't panic. Things are not as bad. Markets will recover. Look, Russian ruble costs a lot now. It's gained a lot of value. Um, you know, if you buy Lada, you will pay less in dollars and so forth. The markets are reacting in a way they should be reacting. When you give people freedom, they choose what's best for them. And what's best for them right now is not to buy cars. They don't want to buy the Chinese because it's been 3 years since the start of the Chinese cars in Russia, and everyone understands that they're disposable. So instead of building infrastructure plants, bringing spare parts, and teaching mechanics how to fix their cars, the Chinese are simply pulling away from Russia. Over 64 and counting manufacturers have left Russia since beginning of 2025. Okay? They're not here to stay. They came in for a short time, sold as many cars as they could, and they're going back to China, where they belong. Foreign companies are not coming back. It is clear now. There have been rumors in the past couple months about Kia coming back. Today it made an announcement. It has no plans of coming into Russia. Toyota, same thing. There were rumors about Toyota, about the European car manufacturers. No one is coming back. Even after the war, I don't believe that they will come back because, look, you just lost so much money in Russia. They confiscated everything that you had here. You had been building for years, perhaps decades. Plants, warehouses, infrastructure, dealerships. Russian government just stole everything. Now, I guess it hopes that people, the businessmen, have short memory and wants to do the same, to pull the same trick. Saying, "Hey, come back to Russia." And if someone comes back a few years down the road, they will do the same thing. They'll steal it again. So I don't think that many companies will be coming back. The gray import Western cars are very expensive. That leads to very low demand for them. But the biggest problem is people are becoming poor. This is the situation that was happening with me and with my family back in the USSR. I was growing up in the 80s, and one of my dreams was my dad to own a car because I hated walking. I hated waiting in line to get into a bus. It was very frustrating, very demeaning experience. Okay, I don't know, anyone who's been to a Russian bus knows it's like people there were like sardines in a can. And I just wanted my dad to have a car so we could travel as a family, me and my mom and my dad. I don't know, go fishing, just go and driving outside of the city, things like that. That's what I dreamt of. We couldn't even look into owning a car in the USSR. My dad was a professional working at a large plant in charge of all engines. I think there were 12 or 13 large engines, um, railroad engines inside that factory. And my mom was an accountant, chief accountant for a large manufacturing plant, a different one. We couldn't even look at the direction of a car. It was unachievable luxury, okay, for regular Russian folks. Only those who belong to Russian, the Soviet Communist Party, they could afford cars. They were provided cars by the state. Only those who worked in the KGB could afford cars. Things like that. You had to be in the higher class, the communist class, and that's why there weren't many cars. There wasn't enough wealth in the country for people to own and operate cars and drive cars. That everything changed in the 90s, and people started earning. People started making money, and they started buying cars. And that's one of the first things that my mom and dad did. They bought a car, very cheap one, very well. How do I say that? Moskvich. No, it's not even a car. It's a joke of a car. Okay, but still, it had four wheels, steering wheel, and engine, and it moved. And that was liberation. I learned how to drive in 95. I started driving and I felt so good. I was feeling free. It was an incredible feeling. Okay. Right now, I'm seeing degradation. I'm seeing the country going back. I'm seeing economic situation is worsening. Before, in the 90s, it was tough, but it was getting better. We could see the end, the light at the end of the tunnel. Now, the process is reversed. We're going back in Russia. Um, Things are getting worse and worse. And the last article is also about that. Um, Economy is falling apart. Not just in the car manufacturing. There's no Russian car manufacturing. The Chinese don't even want to come to Russia and build plants here because they openly say Russia is not stable enough. Its economy is collapsing. We don't want to risk our investments into Russia. Okay? Um, Things are getting to the point where I think in a year or so, Russian people will think of only one thing: how to get food. At least many Russian people, not all, of course, but many. And when a situation of that caliber, you don't think of cars, owning a car. You don't think of saving money to buy a car because you have different priorities. And the Russian car market, the car sales have declined, collapsed to basically zero because exactly this situation. Russians all of a sudden don't have money because of the economic collapse. The consequences for Russian economy. Number one, the collapse of the automobile market is a serious, very serious blow to the entire economy. It's not a breaker. It cannot break Russian economy because other industries are breakers. For example, oil industry. It has much bigger impact on Russian economy than um, you know automotive market. But still, it adds up to the problems. It's a catch 2022, so to speak. The worse situation is in the Russian market, the worse in Russia, the worse car market is. And the worst car market is that the problems contribute to the general state of the economy. It's a vicious circle. Um, this decline highlights the long term effects of the war and the sanctions very well. What we're seeing right now was planted back in 2022 in the beginning, in February, and now we start harvesting it in Russia. Number two, the situation highlights the vulnerability of Russia's dependence on imported goods. Um, Russians can't manufacture cars, and if they wanted to, because they simply do not have components. They cannot. I'm not even talking about high tech stuff, okay, but they just cannot do transmissions. They cannot do engines. These basic things that the world has been manufacturing for, I don't know, decades. And what is happening, the situation is becoming worse because Russian educational system, that's where we need to look if we want to build a strong automotive industry. We need to look in colleges and schools, the kids need to learn math. But Russian educational system is getting destroyed. And basically all the money are thrown into support of the war economy, and education, healthcare, and other industries are being sequestered right now. They're cutting corners. They're trying to save every single ruble they can. We shouldn't expect good education. Well, it's already has suffered a great deal, but it's gonna get even worse. And then there simply will be no engineers in Russia to build good cars. And there will be no investments because all the investors have left. At the end, Russia is becoming a very odd country. It had different industries and thriving industries. But now it's becoming a country of one industry. The industry that produces death, the military industrial complex. They spare no expenses on that. And they forfeit everything else, including, car manufacturing industry. Russia is on the way to a dark place right now because this situation, this path, this process is not sustainable. Okay, you can only sustain it by making people slaves, taking their freedoms away, closing the country, and that, my friends, is called the USSR. So we're seeing exactly what Putin talked about, has been talking about for the past probably 20 years. He said that the USSR, destruction of the USSR, was the biggest mistake ever made. And then he's bringing Russia and the Russians into new SSSR 2.0, improved, upgraded, much more sinister because now people not just going to be in slavery, but in digital slavery. Folks, Russian car industry is kaput. Um, Russians, they want to drive cars, but they can't afford it anymore. You are seeing absolute collapse right now. Sales have dropped almost to zero. This is just the beginning. This has been done so quickly. It's unbelievable. Less than 3 years. And I have a very important message to you. Friends, keep checking on your politicians. Do not let them go wild. Because if it happens, if they acquire too much power and the control over politicians is taken away from people, this is exactly what will happen to you. You will wake up in Russia one day. different name, but the idea is the same. I think you know what I mean. Do not make this mistake. Learn from our experience and learn from our tragedy. Thank you so much. Carthago delenda est.